Welcome to meeting number 15 of the Standing Committee on Canadian Heritage. I believe we all know the guidelines with regards to our earpieces. Please don't just throw them down, but rather there's a nice little sticker. If you could just put them there in order to protect the ears of the interpreters, that would be wonderful. Today we have two witnesses joining us, Mr. Daniel Clark, and then of course, Ms. Wanda, is it Polson-Holman?
Yes, that's correct.
Perfect. Excellent. Thank you. Joining us virtually from Edmonton, I believe. So in just a moment, I will give each of you an opportunity to give 5-minute opening remarks, and then of course we will go into questions from members. During that period of time, we start with questions from the Conservatives, and then the Liberals, and then the Bloc Québécois. And we'll continue to rotate through. As you know, the study that we are discussing today, and this is our first time, our first meeting to do with this study, has to do with the impact of social media, and in particular influencers on social media, on those under the age of 18. And so we look forward to hearing from those experts that are in the room with us today and learning what you have to explore with us. So with that, I will hand the opportunity to speak over to Mr. Clark. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Madam Chair, committee members, I would like to thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today. I've been studying the ethics of children in social media production for the last 3 years, with research published in the Journal of Business Ethics, a top-ranked journal, entitled The Child Labor in Social Media, Kidfluencers, Ethics of Care and Exploitation. This work is necessary as a recent Harris poll found 29% of children 8 to 12 aspire to a career on YouTube, more than any other career, and are at risk for economic exploitation, consent violations, privacy loss, and other harms. There are two concepts in this field: Sharington, a portmanteau of share and parenting, where parents build social media channels around their children for other parents as the audience, and kidfluencing, where children influence other children or adults through their own social media personality. These concepts differ in the child's role and audience, but share many ethical concerns. Using the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child as our framework, these children's rights, which our research suggests are at risk, include the right to consent. These channels are owned and operated by parents, and children participating through parental caveat is a constant risk. The right to privacy. Even moderately successful channels can expose children to millions of strangers. Their everyday follies, embarrassments, and charms exist forever in social media, potentially haunting them for life. Freedom from economic exploitation. These channels can generate thousands to millions monthly from the child's involvement. Parents should benefit proportionally, but there's no guarantee the children are. Right to education. Being a social media star requires significant time. Kidfluencing may seem like play, but it's work, like acting or performance. It is not uncommon for kidfluencers to be homeschooled. Where is the time for school, play, and sleep? Freedom from harm. Parents may put children at physical risk creating compelling content. There are also the risk of child predators forming parasocial relationships with child influencers. Recently, a study found 95% of adult influencers had been subject to stalking behaviors, and 40% felt fear as a result. Unfortunately, we don't have such data about child influencers. Freedom of expression. Children are brand ambassadors endorsing products and expressing opinions often not their own. When the child is 25, their 15-year-old opinions might prevent them from getting a job or otherwise committing to a position. Over the past year, I've been interviewed numerous times about this paper, and I'm always asked, what can we do about it? Anything in the sphere of child welfare is deferred to the decision-making of the parents, except when parents are generating income, sometimes significant income, some parents' decision-making may be compromised. The platforms these videos appear on, such as Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube, earned $11 billion in advertising to children in 2022. By limiting account ownership to the age of majority, they place an onus on the parents to ensure their children are protected. They set guidance about what is and is not allowed on their platforms, violence, gratuitous nudity or sex, etc., but this is clearly not enough to ensure online child actors are free from exploitation. That means that the federal government may have a role to responsibly regulate this practice. We need to protect these children. Internationally, other jurisdictions have made some progress towards protecting children in these arrangements and their future earnings, and it's time Canada also took action. We need to protect these children from the negative impacts which may arise from the parasocial elements of global exposure through social media. We're all aware of the harm that befell child actors like Macaulay Culkin, Gary Coleman, Shirley Temple, and countless others through exploitation. While it's debatable if there is even a need for kidfluencing in any capacity, if it is allowed in this country, then children who are the subject of this social media enterprise deserve as much protection and recourse from the harms that our law can provide. Thank you, Madam Chair. I look forward to your questions.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Mr. Clark. We will now go to Wanda Polson-Holman for 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and committee members. My name is Dr. Wanda Polson-Holman, and I'm the CEO of Little Warriors. Little Warriors is a national charitable organization, and we have been recognized through numerous scientific and clinical journals as being a leader in the field of child sexual abuse awareness, prevention, advocacy, and evidence-based treatment. I've been involved with Little Warriors for over 8 years, including a previous role as clinical director. I'm clinically trained and have obtained a master's degree and a doctorate, and I am currently a registered clinical social worker. I appreciate the opportunity to share Little Warriors' perspectives with the Standing Committee. On behalf of the children and family we serve, I'm very appreciative to the committee for undertaking this important study. It is indeed an area requiring further understanding and actions. There are some key issues that we have observed at Little Warriors with regard to children and adolescents that I would like to highlight. First and foremost, as a result of social media influencers, we are witnessing significant deterioration with regard to mental health issues, including overall levels of stress, cyberbullying, suicidality increases, anxiety, depression, self-concept concerns, radicalization of gender bias, and concerns related to sextortion, online grooming, as well as luring of our children. This happens in both plain sight, as we are all on social media, as well as in very subtle ways through gaming platforms and social media that parents and educators may not always be apprised of. Families, even those who do their best to ensure proper controls on devices, are very concerned about their children's online experiences, and we have seen this firsthand at Little Warriors, treating children and adolescents who have come to the hands of predators. We understand that there are ongoing issues related to inappropriate content, online interactions with unsafe individuals, and algorithm-driven risks. We are seeing gaps in children's educators as well as parents' digital literacy, and the platforms are constantly changing, giving concern for us all. Additionally, there are issues regarding loss of privacy that children and teens do not always comprehend, and concerns related to children's digital footprints, which could obviously have long-lasting negative implications to them. There are gaps in legislation, deterrence, and penalties regarding both online and in-person harm and access to children from potential predators across geographical borders. Overall, at Little Warriors, we are concerned regarding child exploitation and sexual abuse and the lack of clear and consistent sentencing and regulations. As Canadians, we seem to understand that there are controls required for other aspects relating to children's safety, but we have yet to address social media content harms. In light of these concerns, I'm hopeful that this review will result in decisive action to protect children and uphold accountability. Specifically, to ensure that survivor center supports, including prevention programs such as Little Warriors Prevention Program, are included in new policy measures to support schools, other charities, and both in-person and online community organizations to expand prevention and support resources. Second, to review sentencing gaps and issues of deterrence. We have witnessed sexual offenders of children be released in the public with warnings, only to have been found reoffending a short time later. Protecting children must take precedence over the rights of offenders who perpetrate abuse. Third is legislate stronger and more consistent sentencing provisions for offenses related to the possession, access, and distribution of child sexual abuse and exploitation materials. And fourth, make concessions for individuals to donate to charitable organizations and financially support organizations such as Little Warriors that invest in prevention efforts and work with survivors. The work of this committee is a defining moment for Canada to act with moral clarity and to ensure better safeguards to protect vulnerable children online and in person. I appreciate your time today and look forward to questions.
Thank you very much for your time. I will then go to our first member of parliament to ask questions today, and that is from Mr. Waugh. Mr. Waugh, you have the floor for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Dr. Polson-Holman, and thank you to Professor Clark for being here. I guess my first question, and I will go to the Little Warriors. Wanda, I think the public is seeing increased occurrences, and this is a word that we've talked a lot here in the House of Commons this week, exploitation. And we're seeing it at all levels, but maybe can you give us some stats on children? You had 4 or 5 points that you did make, but the exploitation of children online, do you have any of the stats that maybe you could share with us here today?
Thank you for the question, and I certainly do. I'm also happy to provide more statistics afterwards. Some of the recent statistics that I'm aware of is that with regard to specifically sextortion of children and youth, since 2020, there's been an 80% increase in the reporting of sextortion cases, and victim demographics are most often youth aged 12 to 17. In addition, we also know that CyberTip, for example, has reported a 150% increase with regard to sextortion and online luring between June 2022 and August 2023, and those are the most recent statistics that I'm aware of.
Now, you also mentioned there's gaps in legislation, and I would like you to talk a little bit about that, if you don't mind. We've talked about it a little bit here in Parliament, but you brought it up, and you talked about the gaps in legislation, mainly the sentencing gaps that we've seen over the last number of years. So just bring us up to date what you are seeing in the Edmonton area, Alberta area, and the sentencing gaps that, you know, that could be the job of parliamentarians, you know, when we do go through some legislation.
Well, I know that there have been ongoing issues that have been brought up with regard to the Online Harms Act, and understand that the reason that we're coming together is to explore some pieces related to that. We know that there's similar things that are needed to limit the amount of child sex exploitation. We need some regulations to support schools as well as parents in their understanding, as well as understanding across communities. We know that people from our perspective at Little Warriors, have not been held accountable in the way that they need to. The deterrence is very minimal at this point. We have children who come to us for child sexual abuse treatment as a result of being harmed online and sexually abused and exploited. And many times their offenders and perpetrators are released without serving any time or having any consequences that relate specifically to the crime. And what I mean by that is that the children and teens come to us and are requiring intensive supports and treatment for what has happened to them. And very often their perpetrators are released into the public, sometimes with notifications, and they are reoffending. And we've had several situations at Little Warriors where this has happened, and there is just not enough deterrence in place for them to stop what they're doing. And it's very difficult to continue to follow offenders and perpetrators online as a result of the ongoing changes that are happening and ways that they're doing it through gaming platforms and social media platforms for children as young as 7 or 8 years old.
I come from Saskatchewan. There isn't a week that goes by when we hear through, whether it's city police in Saskatoon, Regina, Prince Albert, Moose Jaw, other locations, or the RCMP, where they have convicted somebody, and then we never hear what happens after the conviction. And it was interesting to hear when you were talking about it, because those that have been exploited, what recommendations would you give this committee then about internet safety? Because in my city of Saskatoon, we have a whole department at the City of Saskatoon Police actually designated looking for perpetrators that are online.
Well, I think it's a really important question. I think that in terms of recommendations of safety, I think the public needs to understand exactly what are the numbers and what is happening and the amount of online offenders that are actually present, that cross international borders and have very little deterrence as well to reach out to children. In Edmonton, we had a very unfortunate case that I'm sure everyone's aware of that crossed into the United States, and unfortunately, that particular child and her family have forever been changed. And fortunately, the offender was charged in the United States, but we've had other children where their offenders come and are in Canada and are released very early, or released and have fled the country, and had other situations where there's very little ability to follow up on their sentencing. So that's very important, as well as supporting children and families to understand the complexities and changes that are happening with regard to safety measures online.
Thank you, Dr. Polzenholmen. The next person with the mic is MPL Sood. You have the floor for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being with us today. It is greatly appreciated. Social media platforms and influencer culture now play a defining role in the lives of children and adolescents. They shape everything from their self-image to their social interactions. I'm part of a generation that has very directly seen and experienced the online and digital environment, and it's not just on social media, but it's in video games as well, specifically in lobbies. I'm also part of a generation that has notoriously found ways around age verification processes. And I think that's much of what I'd like to discuss today. Professor Clark, you've been an associate professor of entrepreneurship at the Ivey Business School since July 2025. Your current research focuses on the cognition and decision-making of entrepreneurs. You made reference to an article earlier called The Child Labor in Social Media, Kidfluencers, Ethics of Care and Exploitation. And in that article, you cited in Western News saying, consent isn't a one-time event. It must be continuous, informed, and freely given. For kidfluencers, let's be real, it isn't. I'm curious, given that children cannot provide ongoing informed consent, what safeguards do you believe platforms or governments should require to ensure that minors' images, data, and labor are not exploited in influencer environments?
Madam Chair, that's a great question. The simple fact is, you're right. There is no consent for very young children, and at the very least, there is maybe assent. That you know that the child is not doing it truly against their wishes, but they can't actually consent to all the implications that come with it. So, to be perfectly honest, this is one of my arguments towards the fact that there is a date, probably somewhere around the age of 14 and 16, where young people can take back control of their digital identities. But before that, I do not see the benefits of allowing children to post and feature in social media content to a wide audience. Two things enhance the risk here: the amount of time that they spend making content, and more importantly, for what you're pointing to, is the amount of time that the amount of exposure that they get. So you get past 1,000 people, you get up to the millions and tens of millions and hundreds of millions of exposures. You are magnifying the risk infinitely, and no child is in the capacity to understand what they're consenting to when you're talking about those large numbers. I mean, my own 6-year-old struggles with the difference between 5 and 5 million, and so I can't imagine too many other kids are really understanding how big exposure is.
Thank you for that. Growing up, I too was quite interested in the YouTube space, and my father at the time, and to this day, was very reluctant at the idea of seeing me join or engage in YouTube in any way, shape, or form. And in hindsight, it made perfect sense. I'm not particularly talented. I'm not a great musician in any way, shape, or form. But it did ultimately stand to benefit me significantly. In your view, who is currently benefiting from this gap, and who should be held accountable for protecting children from being commercialized online? And what policy mechanisms do you think might help us do that?
So the number one beneficiary in this space are the platforms. But there's no halfway about it. These are massive, massive companies making billions in revenue, specifically in the advertising from child content and the advertising to children. The fact that there is no control over this is a giant mistake. The fact that we've been asking them to police themselves is a massive mistake, and it is not in anybody's best interest to do so. Beyond that, I mean, the primary beneficiary financially is the parents. And so if you are beneath the age of 12, you cannot have a YouTube account. You cannot have a TikTok account. Your point about age verifications is taken, but if you want to get paid from those things, you certainly can't get paid through PayPal or the other mechanisms at that age. So the kids are employees of their parents, and anything that's happening to them as a result of that is because their parents are putting them in that position to be their employees. And so the protections ultimately should fall on the parents, or as a proxy, us as a society.
That same article states that each kidfluencing venture is a privately owned enterprise and the employees in question are minors. Given these indicators, how do you believe platforms and regulators distinguish between legitimate participation in social media and ventures that are exploitative, and what concrete step do you believe we can do to prevent children from being put in those situations? I recall a couple weeks ago we had Meta here, and Meta made reference to the idea of the app stores taking on that burden of essentially ensuring age verification. Do you believe that might be a venue to be explored?
Well, the age verification component, is valuable when it talks about downloading the app and who's watching social media. But when it comes to putting content on social media, basically we effectively punt this to the parents. We say, oh, well, if the parents are okay with this video, with this production, because they're the ones who have to own the account, that's effectively our responsibility. So honestly, I don't think age verification is going to really help us here beyond a point. That ultimately we have a responsibility to say that there's harm being done, and that harm is being done irrespective of the de facto age, and that people are profiting from that, and that is a broader, wider, more societal problem.
Thank you very much. We will now go to Mr. Shampoo for 6 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Je vais commencer.
Thank you, Chair. I will start by not thanking Mr. Alsoud for making us feel like dinosaurs when he said he's part of the YouTube generation. Those of the vinyl, camcorder, Super 8 generation, thank you for reminding us that we were from another generation. That being said, I appreciate the fact that many generations are represented around this table to discuss topics that affect everyone. Mr. Clark, let me start with you. And I would like to echo what my colleague, Mr. Atut, discussed with you concerning the age of users and the regulations we may anticipate when it comes to age of users and verification. In Australia, an act was recently passed and implemented that prohibits social media use for young people below 16. Do you think this is something that we can draw from and learn from? Because it may be, do you think it may be easy to go around for those who want to use their children as social media tools to make income?
I think that's a great point, and I think what's happening in Australia is a good step. You know what? We can talk about how people might get around these regulations, but that's a deliberate act. You have to want to get around them. You have to be willing to falsify. You have to be willing to obfuscate. You have to be willing to take a proactive act to break the rules here. And so I'd rather there be rules in place that were imperfect than having nothing in place. And I mean, I think you could go straight bans. You could have usurious fines. You could, I mean, there's lots of ways to go about this that I think would at the very least reduce the harm. And while I think eliminating the harm is impossible, I think your point there is very well taken, and same thing with Mr. Sood. But I'm happy to live in a world of harm reduction right now, because there's none right now.
Mais est-ce que ça s'applique ou est-ce que les plateformes vont...
Will the platforms find a way of circumventing this rule, as they often do? Once regulations are enforced, will platforms find a way of circumventing that regulation? And how else can we implement this law? Because we may be cynical, thinking that irrespective of what we'll do, platforms will find a way to circumvent them and continue applying their own rules.
So, yeah, I think there is a real risk that the platforms will allow loopholes to exist. Until you tell them they have to close that loophole, they will say, oh, you know what, they didn't say anything about that, we're going to leave that one open. And so that is always absolutely a possibility. I don't believe the platforms here are good actors. They are not thinking about the best interests of the people who are creating content for their platforms. They are thinking primarily about the other side. They're thinking about users. They want to facilitate use and watching and viewing and advertising as much as humanly possible. So I wish I was an expert on age verification technologies. I'm not, because we need better age verification technologies. We need independent age verification technologies, because as long as we allow the platforms to be in charge of this, it is in their best interest to be bad at it, because they don't want to keep people off the platforms, either as content producers or content watchers. They need, that's their audience, and so you're absolutely right.
Je me tourne vers Madame Paulsen-Holman.
Miss Dr. Paulsen-Holman, let me tell me that you really struck me when you talked about the effects of social media on mental health and the impact of all that on mental health. Let me ask you a question. Do you think that it's a solution to copy what is going on in Australia by prohibiting as much as possible access to social media and similar online content depending on age? For Australia, it's from 16 years. But it's up to us to decide whether it's 14, 16, or 18. What do you think of the impact such a law could have?
Thank you very much for the question. I would agree with Mr. Clark. I think that the idea related to what Australia is doing is a good first step. I think having some rules in place versus having nothing and looking at harm prevention is very important, specifically related to the issues that are coming up related to mental health as well as child exploitation. I think platforms may try to circumvent any laws that are attempted to be put in place, but certainly I think that this would limit and address issues of non-intentional consent that's happening with children. We are seeing this, like I had mentioned previously, with 7 and 8-year-olds who are simply clicking the yes button, yes, I'm over the age of 18, and there's no way to verify otherwise, and it's putting them at enormous harm for online predators.
Vous avez parlé tantôt de radicalisation.
You talked about radicalization as well, and that is concerning. At a very young age, we are already observing the effects of radicalization?
Please.
Yes.
Merci, merci beaucoup. C'était.
Thank you. That's one very quick answer.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry. Next up here, then, we have Mr. Genroux for 5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Mr. Clark, Dr. Paulson-Woolman, is there a French version of Little Warriors in Canada?
Is not a French version at this point. We do have a Prevent It program, however, that we are and have created a Prevent It version that is French for French-speaking Canadians. Beyond that, we're looking at Spanish as well because it's being looked at as an area outside of Canada as well for other languages.
Merci. Je m'adresse maintenant aux deux témoins.
Thank you. My question goes to the two witnesses. From your personal experiences, you've seen technology evolve over the years, of course. What's the fundamental difference of your observations when you look at the technologies that existed 5, 10, 15 years ago? Because when it's the internet we're talking about, it's 15 or 20 years old. What are the most fundamental changes you've seen compared to what we have today, while taking into account the fact that artificial intelligence is adding to the potential risks, in my opinion, things that society has to face when we look at technological tools? What are the main issues that you've observed with the technology evolving when it comes to the harms and dangers that young people are experiencing now versus what they experienced in the past?
Who do you want to go first?
Go ahead, Mr. Clark.
I think there's a few things. First of all, you're right. Artificial intelligence is changing the game because of the speed at which new content can be created. You can put a few prompts into a video generating engine, a few into an audio generation, and a few into an editing engine, and you can have a brand new video that may involve no actual new original human content within 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, and have it up on YouTube. You can recycle and reuse existing content to create new content readily fast. So the AI on this is terrifying. The other thing that I think is really accelerating is the ease of access to the internet. I mean, we've all had smartphones that have been able to watch video, but think about how 5G has increased the quality and access to video consumption in just the past few years. You can download high definition videos to your phone anywhere in North America without even a blink of an eye, and so the ability and access to these things exists 24 hours a day. And if you have a kid, that means they probably have an iPad, they probably have a phone, they probably have access to a computer. Keeping them away from all these technological bases is almost a form of child abuse in their eyes these days, because they want to be on the internet in some way, shape, or form, and it becomes ridiculously difficult to police all of them and have the right protections on all of them. So I would say the ease of access and the AI component and the ability to create new content are probably the two that are really accelerating this.
Madame Pullman? Holden?
I would agree with what Mr. Clark is saying. At Little Warriors, what we've unfortunately already seen is the issues with regard to deep fakes related to child sexual abuse. So taking images non-consensually and manipulating them in a way that produces child sexual abuse exploitation material with children and teen images. The concern of this, and certainly what we've seen, is the level of cyberbullying that has come from adults in and on the internet, as well as from other children in communities. And unfortunately, when children, as Mr. Clark had mentioned, has such ease and accessibility to these things, they're using it and manipulating images and sharing images without the full understanding and implications of the effects on the individual that they're sharing it about.
Est-ce que vous avez l'impression, je vais faire référence à ma propre...
Now I'm referring to my own person. When I was young, we did not have any bad intentions in our games, the way we played with others, with our interactions with other young people. Do you have the impression, Dr. Harmon, that now with all these technological tools, the intention amongst young people, and I'm talking about young people interacting with other young people, because you've talked about deep fakes, videos, and so on. Mr. Blake referred to them. Now, the intention amongst young people to hurt or to make other people look bad, do you see an increase in such interactions? So my question is really whether society has evolved. Has society evolved in the wrong direction with all these technologies?
I'm so sorry. Unfortunately, I'm not going to let you answer that question, but hopefully you'll have an opportunity to speak to that in a moment or two. With that, I am going to give the floor to Ms. Roy for 5 minutes.
Merci. My first question is for Mr. Clark, but really beginning with some extraordinary statistics that you shared. You said that 80% of youth surveyed aspire to a career as an influencer, I think, is what you... Pardon? It was 29%. Sorry, 29, okay. Thank you. Thank you for the clarification, which is already incredibly high. Yeah. And the other one was that $11 billion was earned by children in 2022. And I guess really that would be their parents or the account holders.
So $11 billion was earned in advertising. The amount that was shared with the account holders would be substantially less. But we do know that the top earning kidfluencers routinely make north of $30 million a year.
Okay. Okay, got it. How do algorithm-driven recommendation systems amplify harmful or age-inappropriate content for minors?
Yeah, if you've ever gotten lost down a YouTube hole, you know the power of the algorithms. They basically effectively reach into your brains, figure out what it is you like or want, and they just keep feeding you more and more and more of the same. So for my 6-year-old daughter, it's videos about Minecraft and Roblox, and there's an unending stream of them, and it keeps her online, and it keeps her watching advertising, and it keeps her as a consumer, unless myself or my wife basically say, enough. And so there is no end to the internet anymore. Once upon a time, I used to joke, "Oh, I've reached the end of the internet." That doesn't exist anymore. The algorithms are always able to find and create, not create, but find and probe content that is going to allow me to stay on board and keep earning them money.
Influencer content that generates higher risk profiles than others? Would it be Minecraft searches? Would it be beauty or sports? Or what are some of the top?
So the questions about risk come along to which group you're talking about. So for kids, they're, let's say preteen kids, anybody sub 12 years old. You're looking at things that allow them to engage into a world and get lost into a world. So gaming content is a big one. Ones that feature personalities that look and act like them. So other 10-year-olds and 7-year-olds and 8-year-olds allow them to escape into a world where they have friends instantly. And my daughter frequently says, "Oh, I'm just watching my friend." And how is this person your friend? Well, they talk to me and they watch me and I watch them, and she wants to make videos so that her friends can watch her, right? And so there's that particularly immersive world that is susceptible for preteens. Post-teens, it's about creating a more idealized, socialized world where you have larger friend groups, and you might be, as you say, fashion videos. It might be kids hanging out and doing fun things or doing silly, silly stunts, etc. There's different pockets that appeal to boys, there's different pockets that appeal to girls, but it is a fundamentally different architecture where it's more about specifically the kids driving their own world post in the teenage years, whereas in the sub-teen years, it's about creating a world for the kids to get immersed into.
Okay, interesting. What do you think would be the long-term societal impacts on, if the current trend in youth exposure, remains, and if it remains unaddressed, what would be sort of long-term impacts?
Devastating. If you just take, we use a lot in proxies of former child stars and TV and movies as a warning sign, right? So, the kid who got all their money stolen by their parents, the kid who became an alcoholic or a drug addict or committed suicide. Now, all those situations were fundamentally contained by that there's a relatively small amount of TV and movie content that's produced. Now multiply that by an infinity, because there's no limit to how much social media content can be produced. So you're potentially creating a pool of victimized young people that is enormous. And so if we thought it was bad to watch, Macaulay Culkin get all his money stolen by his parents, imagine that multiplied by tens and tens of thousands of kids being pillaged of their income and taken by their parents or whomever.
And that's time. Awesome. Thank you so much. Mr. Jambeau for 2.5 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Chair. Dr. Poulsen-Holman, you talked about deepfakes a while ago. This committee carried out a study a year ago on harms caused by online activity, a study that led to recommendations. One of them was very simple, and what do you think about some of them? The fourth recommendation was that digital platforms had to introduce processes for detecting and denouncing illegal and explicit content like sexual material related to children, including deepfakes. The fifth recommendation was also easy to implement. Witnesses who appeared before the committee had asked that 62(1) of the Criminal Code that defines intimate image be amended to include the idea of sexual deepfakes. That was not done. In your opinion, are these tools that are a good idea to introduce? Could those recommendations be made again as proposed within the framework of the study we made during the last Parliament?
Thank you so much. I completely agree. I think that the as things have been outlined in those 4 recommendations, I think clearly it would be a good place for us to begin to look at setting clear guidelines and expectations. Just to add to that, without that, I think that we will be looking at further issues related to child exploitation, luring, and other online issues, that we will have other issues that come forward as a result requiring treatment and intervention that is very costly.
Est-ce que vous avez l'impression des fois qu'on
Do
tourne
you
en rond?
sometimes have the impression that, irrespective of what we're doing, we are working for nothing? We are on the same spot because the platforms will continue implementing, as Dr. Clark said, they will come up with loopholes all the time. Are we wasting our time?
Décourage à un moment
Because
donné.
at some point we get discouraged.
I understand the discouragement. We certainly see that in the work that we do at Little Warriors. I think, again, having nothing in place is sort of giving up and not ensuring that the safety of our vulnerable children and teens is in place. I think that having some kind of rules in place versus having nothing and not taking responsibility as a society is just not acceptable.
Merci.
Thank you. And we will now go to Mr. Diot for 5 minutes.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and thanks to both witnesses. It's a really fascinating topic. I wanted to talk to Dr. Polson-Holman a bit. First of all, thanks for your good work. I'm very familiar with your organization, being a fellow Edmontonian, and you've got a great reputation. I wanted to kind of bring this home to talk about a real-world story. I noticed that on your website you talk about the case of Michelle, a mother whose story reminds us of why Little Warriors was created. Can you tell us a bit about Michelle's story and the story she shared about her daughter and how her daughter fell victim?
Thank you, Mr. Diot. I appreciate your kind words. I certainly can say a little bit more about the child and family that were impacted. The child was treated at Little Warriors in our intensive episodic treatment center, and the reason that she came to us is that there was an online predator, and the parents of the child, who at the time was somewhere around 12 years of age. The parents were very much involved in this child's life, very much involved in setting controls and checking and supporting their child's digital literacy. The issue actually came when the child was at school and was able to access social media platforms where the offender took advantage of safety that wasn't in place and continued to reach out, came to Edmonton not once but twice and met her at her school, and at that point had taken her across the border in the United States and had significantly sexually assaulted and raped her. So, you know, this unfortunately is a very significant example of what can happen and what the harms are, but unfortunately this is not an isolated incident. We've had numerous other situations of boys and girls under the age of 18 who have had very similar situations and have been assaulted as a result and have been manipulated in various ways. So it is a problem that definitely needs to be addressed, and we can't settle for what currently is in place.
Thanks for that. And you had mentioned sexual offenders being released with mere warnings. Can you talk a bit about that and how often that occurs?
Well, unfortunately, we have situations, Mr. Diot, you would be also familiar with the case. There was an offender who was found who was reported at a daycare just outside of Edmonton and had access to children under the age of 5 at a preschool or a daycare setting. And he was awaiting trial and actually fled the country. And since that time, we are aware that there have been other children who, again, ages 4, 5, 6 years old, who unfortunately have experienced the abuse that he put upon them in the daycare. We've had numerous situations where children and teens who are awaiting treatment and can't get into treatment have their offenders released because there's not enough information or not enough sentencing, or that they've served a short period of time and are released and have reoffended again.
So what would you like to see done in that regard? What are some immediate steps that could be taken there?
Well, it's not my area of expertise to say, but certainly I think we need to be looking at our sentencing and perhaps having minimum and mandatory minimums, as well as looking at the process in which and the speed to which we support vulnerable children and youth and their families to report sexual abuse.
And that you would not be a fan of the recent Supreme Court decision against mandatory minimums for child pornography.
I know it's a complex issue, and I understand some of the rationale behind that, but from the perspective of supporting vulnerable children and youth, my position is always to ensure that our focus is on supporting children and youth, and ensuring that they're safe, and that offenders should be serving their sentences and be treated with very significant penalties for their actions.
Thank you, Doctor. I'm going to give the floor now to Mr. Natumba for 5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Good afternoon to you too. Thank you for your very interesting perspectives. Let me start with Professor Clark. I don't know about you, but when I go home with my kids, I could name products, I could say a bottle of water, watch, and so on. And immediately on my Facebook, I see offers for watches automatically without me having searched. On Instagram, I see offers even when it's not Black Friday. So let me ask you this. Is someone listening to us? And if so, how can we avoid this?
My wife would agree with you that somebody's listening in. To a certain extent, there's a lot of ways that this is happening, right? You type anything into Google, that gets saved as a cookie, and that other platforms can draw upon, and they can create content and push advertising towards you that is specifically through your interests, what things that you like, and that's a big part of the internet phenomenon. Is anything you do on your phone can be done that. And there is considerable risks that things like Alexa and other and Siri can indeed be listening to you and making sense of what you want, and also there's WhatsApp, for example. the ability of the platforms to mine what you're doing on WhatsApp, particularly Meta, obviously, because they own WhatsApp, to mine it and then import that information about you over to Facebook, over to Instagram, one of their other platforms, and use that to figure out what you like, where you're going, what you're interested in, and direct content towards you is absolutely happening.
Quand vous avez parlé de cookies,
You talked about cookies. When we look into them, they contain a lot of information written in tiny print, lots of pages to read. I must confess that I never read the fine print, but if we started reading that, may we discover that there's information telling us that we are being listened to because we no longer feel safe with our devices, whereas we're using that to communicate with those outside our world.
So, yeah, the fine print in the user agreements, which they change on a very regular basis. So even if you actually did read it with a fine-tooth comb, spending many, many hours going through every single line, a month later they're likely to change it on you, and it looks completely different. But yeah, you are effectively giving them permission to do pretty much whatever you want when you click on the box.
Madame Wanda,
Dr. Holman, I know a bit about your background and your work in defense of women and against juvenile pornography. Sometimes our children put pictures on Instagram, Facebook, and online. Recently, I was with Mr. Genero in Kelowna at a workshop where we heard how the pictures of children were taken and identities of children elsewhere was produced without their consent. As parents, we know the pictures we place online. How can we protect those photographs?
Thank you for the question. I don't think that given what we know that we can protect other than not putting images online. We have had numerous training through the RCMP, through other specialists in the area specifically of online images. And what we know is that just even regular sort of photos that would get put up by parents on Facebook or other social media platforms that, like their children playing in the bath or something like that, that those images can actually be manipulated and taken and used for sexual content without consent and without awareness. And so we are aware through the trainings that we've received that there are children and teens images that are manipulated and utilized, and that we would actually never even necessarily know that they're online in that capacity.
Dr. Polson-Holman, thank you very much for your remarks. In time, I am going to take 5 minutes for questions, and then we'll continue from there. My first question is for you, Dr. Polson-Holman. Sorry. I'm wondering if you can comment a little bit further, just in terms of maybe we'll start here. Actually, on your website, you state that more than 95% of child sexual abuse cases in Canada go unreported, and I'm just curious as to why that number is so high.
Well, there's several reasons why that number is so high. First and foremost is that many children and teens who are sexually abused, this is happening with offenders who are very well known to them, family members, other people within their social circles that are offending against them. And so over time, they and or their caregivers have been manipulated and groomed either in person or online line, and oftentimes by the time that the offense takes place, or offenses oftentimes takes place, is there's been a lengthy period of time that they've been involved with certain activities and been exploited, and so they begin to feel that they are somehow partially to blame, or that there's embarrassment or shame. Oftentimes offenders will manipulate them and tell them that they will be hurt or their family will be hurt. So there's many reasons. I recently read a study, not a Canadian study, but that shared that adults, as child sexual abuse survivors, their first time sharing their offense is actually in their 50s. So I don't have Canadian stats on that, but there's many reasons why that number is as high as it is.
Thank you for your reflections on that. I'm curious if you can reflect maybe a little bit more on what are the harms, what unique harms, I guess, arise when the sexual abuse or grooming or exploitation takes place online versus in person?
I think there's many of the same harms. Obviously, significant impacts for safety, significant impacts to mental health and wellness, as we've talked about. I think the difference is that when there are things going on online, we don't know the extent to which this is happening, and it crosses borders. It doesn't just stay in the home or the community, but it can be transitioned halfway across the world, and the images are shared, and no one would know that. So, while there's similarities, and I don't think that one is better or worse, or, less disruptive or less disturbing, I think that the issue is really with regard to how far reaching it is.
Doctor, in your time with us today, if there was one thing that you wanted us to take away from our time with you, given your experience over many years, probably decades, of working with children in these vulnerable situations, what would be the thing that you would want us to take away?
I think understanding the level of concern. Oftentimes people think that this happens to other people or other people's children. This is happening. I guarantee that once you start talking about this and removing the barriers for communication and discussion around this, that the prevalence is very high. We know that 1 in 4 children, 1 in 4 girls, 1 in 6 boys under the age of 18 is sexually abused in some way. And we know that 95% isn't reported. So when we talk about the numbers, it's a very significant number, and we need to be taking it seriously and recognizing that this isn't about someone else's child. This is about all of our children, all of our teens, and within all of our families and communities.
Sorry. Thank you very much for those reflections. Very much appreciated. A quick question to you, Mr. Clark. Just curious, you said that $11 billion is earned in ad revenue in the United States of America, but I'm just curious if you have any stats for Canada.
Unfortunately, I don't. I believe that was actually the total earnings of the platform, so that would include Canada as well. But I don't know what the Canadian ad revenue is for children, for media consumed by children under the age of 18.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, we have MP Miles for 5 minutes.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I have been on social media for most of my career, and I've kind of witnessed how it influences my own mood and how I react to the things I put on. I was a musician for years, and it behaves very differently than TV or movies, as you said before. And the thing that I find particularly, I have young kids now, I think, is the addictiveness. And I think I guess I wonder is sometimes I wonder if we're going to look back at this time and be like, we were giving cigarettes to our kids. Because in many ways, it's really similar. Like I see the same gap. I see how addictive it is. We're probably all addicted to it in some way. We know that algorithm in many ways is actually better. Like I have a hard time. I'm a disciplined person, and I find it hard to discipline myself to turn the thing off and stop because the algorithm, it knows what I want to see and what's going to get me upset and what's going to make me happy. So I guess I wonder if there is, in terms of regulation, when we're talking about who uses it and how can we do this when the algorithm itself is so addictive? And is there any possibility, or is there in your discussions, and maybe both of you could answer this, is there a possibility to address the actual addictiveness of the algorithm? I mean, of course, the platforms aren't going to be interested in that, and maybe that's overstepping, but at some point, I think we need to talk about this as a highly addictive thing in the same way that we talk about cigarettes. We regulate cigarettes. We regulate their advertisements to kids. We regulate how people interact with them, how they're sold, all those kind of things.
So this is a little bit out of my area of expertise, but I actually think I want to weigh in on a little bit on this, is that there is a privacy issue here. You are a unique individual to YouTube or to Instagram. They know you. They know what you like. They know what you want. They know what you've watched before. They have a file on you somewhere. Maybe they shouldn't. Maybe they shouldn't be allowed to capture personal usage data on us so that they can target us. I don't know our ability to regulate this, and given that chances are this data does not exist in Canada, it probably is in some vault somewhere in the States or in Iceland or wherever. But the simple fact is they are collecting information on you. They are using it to figure out who you are, what you like, and what you want. I swear I think YouTube knows me better than my wife does, and we've been married for 10 years, and she knows me very well, but she can't tell you what I want to watch on YouTube the way YouTube can. So that's a frightening thing for me. And so I wonder about that degree of privacy and the platform's ability to know us so well.
I would also just add something that you've brought forward with regard to the addictiveness and brain development. We know that children and teens, that our brains are not fully developed until well into their 20s. And so we have seen the effects of the addictiveness of the algorithms, of the changes with regard to socialization and interests for even infants who are given iPads and other devices. And we know that the reward center of the brain is completely connected with those algorithms. And so we are very clear from a neurodevelopmental perspective that this kind of thing is actually changing the brains and therefore changing the trajectory of our children's development.
That's what I fear. It's exactly as I feared, is that we're going to look back at this and go, oh man, we missed this. You know, we were unaware of it. And I think it's interesting, Dr. Clark, what you were saying just also about some of the opportunities, maybe not just looking at the algorithm in general, but where in that algorithm does it become more addictive? I think the other thing is, maybe we can speak about this a little bit more too, is that these algorithms are agnostic. They don't just feed you what is positive, they feed you what also makes you angry. And as a content creator, you can see something really blow up on the internet and it might feel good, but something can blow up because of the negativity of it as well, as we've all probably experienced. We get lots of comments and it might not be positive. And when you think about that in the adolescent mind or as a young mind in terms of its self-image, these can be devastating. Devastating. I mean, it's one thing to get applause for a song you sing. It's another thing to become a meme because you didn't sing well and you become a joke. So I think there's also something about that is different than television, right? Is that this algorithm's agnostic. It just wants it to gain a reaction, whether it be negative or positive. And that certainly has an effect on one's concept of self-image. Maybe you can speak to that, Dr. Polson-Holman, maybe in your own experience.
I think you've said it very nicely. The one thing that I would add is that we're not just seeing the positives or the things that make us angry. We're seeing things that are not real. With AI, people are not able to determine, and certainly children and teens not able to determine what's actually real and what is fake. So I think that this changes a lot of things with regard to how we view the world, how we see ourselves, and certainly your point is well taken that are we missing an opportunity to step in and address this issue? I would wholeheartedly agree.
Thank you. Mr. Shampoo for 2.5 minutes.
Je trouvais très intéressant le parallèle que monsieur...
I found Mr. Massey's comparison with cigarette smoking very interesting. In the 60s and even in the 80s, people were smoking everywhere, in classrooms, in schools, everywhere, until we realized to what extent it was dangerous, and then we started regulating cigarette smoking. But everyone was in agreement. It was clear. Now we are experiencing another phenomenon that is also just as concerning. Even though it's different, but it's concerning to see what is happening with our kids being exposed to platforms, social media, the internet, generally speaking. My 14-year-old daughter questions what the teacher taught her in school because she's seen something online which is different from what she heard in school. She credits something that an influencer said on TikTok more than what the teacher said. Dr. Poulsen-Holman, maybe you may also react to that. We need to find out in education what should be done by parents earlier to prevent and not to simply react. Do you think it's taking us time to act, as was the case with cigarette smoking?
I think that's a good comparison, and I have two things to say about it. First and foremost is that children and teens, developmentally, we know that there are certain stages. And so the stages of development require that our experience informs those stages. And so when we don't have controls, when we don't have the ability to walk them through or talk them through certain things that they're experiencing those stages, it impacts them as individual human beings. I think sometimes what we're seeing in social media is that freedom of speech is often manipulated to and disguised in terms of anything and everything goes, versus slowing it down enough so that parents, educators, all of us in our children and teens' lives have the ability to intervene. We don't have the ability to intervene when things are so fast-paced and when influencers, as you mentioned, are being seen as experts.
Merci beaucoup, docteur.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Moving on then, we have Mr. Genroux for 5 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Madame Holman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Holman, I would like you to tell us more about your organization because I find what you do very interesting. A while ago, you talked about technological literacy, so to speak, amongst young people, whether it be with through parents or organizations like yours, maybe the possibility of having more funding to do that work of education, training, maybe tax credits. If I understood you well, I think that is what I understood. Maybe philanthropists give you money, but maybe you could get more money that goes to your organization and other similar organizations. Could you tell us more about that?
Yes, thank you so much for your comments, and I'm certainly in full agreement. As a charity organization, in the last 8 years, our organization has quadrupled in size. When I first started 8 years ago, we had a children's program to support children and their families who have been sexually abused. Since that time, we've expanded to support adolescents. We've had to, since the pandemic, increase our services to support families and intensive family programs for intergenerational trauma. And we've also expanded our online psychoeducational programs for children, teens, and families. And we support educators and other professionals in the field and across Canada. We know that we're one organization. There are other really great organizations who are doing some similar work, but our funding has not expanded. We continue to fundraise for these things, and we know that the issues and the concerns continue to grow, as demonstrated by our own growth to be able to support children and families in various ways, both online, in person, and within different developmental areas.
J'aimerais juste corriger, M. Dumba, tantôt, a dit qu'on était allé à Kelowna ensemble.
You said you went to Kelowna together. It was rather Toronto. Oh, we went to Toronto to attend a training on artificial intelligence. It was impressive to see, just like what my colleague from the block has just said, young people come to class thinking they've become experts because they've seen influencers say certain things online, and then they try to contradict or argue. And I know that that's how we learn, by debating with teachers and parents, so it's not all negative. But Professor Clark, given that the role of the parent in all this, because when we're referring to cigarette smoking, comparing it to cigarette smoking, there's a parental role. Do you find that today the parent role is less important or reduced in spite of the explosion of technology? When you look into things like AI as well, we just completed a study on that. Could parents be wiser or be more present? In Quebec, telephones have been banned from classrooms, for example. I think that's an excellent choice or decision. As Mr. Miles said a while ago, last week I was told we had to keep our phones aside. We had to speak to one another.
I think parents can obviously be an important part here. There's no halfway about it. The parents are not less important. They're probably more important than they've ever been before. But they also don't necessarily have the tools to affect the protection of their children that they potentially need. Let me give you an example. In 2002, a young man in Quebec, Ghislaine Raza, was fooling around with a golf stick, a golf club, as if it was a lightsaber. And his friend videotaped it and then put it on YouTube and attracted 1 billion views. And that kid then got absolutely pillared online through trolls and through abuse, to the point where he had significant psychological repercussions about it. Nowhere in there was the parent really in a position to do anything about it. It was a video that was just taken and was put online, and it just exploded. So, yeah, parents, we're going to do everything we can to try and protect our kids, but our kids have so many points of access to this information and this ability. Well, they could use a computer at school. They can use a computer at a coffee shop. They can use their phones anywhere. Either we're going to become Luddites and give up technology, which I think none of us are prepared to do, and we don't necessarily think that's good for our kids either. As parents, we can do our best, but we need help. We need tools. We need the ability to have support. As you say, the rule about blocking phones in schools, great idea. Absolutely. But it only covers part of the problem.
That's time. All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Clark. We will now go to MP Miles for 5 minutes.
Thanks. I'm sure we'll just keep on going on this topic because I think part of it comes down to awareness, particularly about the behavior of the algorithm. Again, people, I think, we're still behind in understanding exactly how it reacts. One thing that I am concerned with particularly, and Monsieur Champoux had mentioned it as well, which is the idea of radicalization and polarization. Again, because of the nature of the algorithm reacting, it seeks reaction, strong reaction, both negative and positive. A moderate position that doesn't get anybody super angry or super happy doesn't have much of a life online. So I guess what I wonder about also is the effect on young people of public discourse, civil public discourse, being able to disagree. That we're quite good at it here in this room, I think, which is a very important thing for polarization in the future of our democracy in our country. And I do worry about this effect of the algorithm on young people's ability to have civil discourse. Because if, as you just looking through the comments, but even the algorithm itself, the way it behaves and reacts, it makes me fearful of these things. How can we make people aware of these things? How can we address these issues so people understand that that discourse in person looks very different? I hope.
We could all learn from hockey a little bit here. You have a game where people are checking each other and slashing each other and shooting pucks at each other's heads. And at the end of the game, you go up to each other and you shake each other's hands. You have some high fives, and I think we have to learn to have intellectual battles the same way we have physical battles, and know that it's not personal. So if we talk about the role of schools and the role of parents, I think engaging kids in a way that allows them to learn how to have arguments, and it's not about it's about the ideas, and don't take everything so personally, and just and have free-flowing progressive ideas. It'd be great. I love that. I mean, that's what being an academic is all about, and that's what we try and preach in academia. So if we could figure out how to teach our kids to do that, that would be amazing.
Before I go to Dr. Poulsen-Holman, the challenge is, of course, in a hockey game, you are in the room with the person, and there's a human being on the other side. Right? In a university class, there's a human being that you sense has feelings and dignity.
Yes.
Online, you don't have that.
Yeah.
Right? There's a facelessness to it, and that is the danger of this. Just in terms of it becoming the norm of behavior, how do you address that where they're not in the same room, where they're not seeing each other at the end of the game?
That's a great question. I don't know if you can address it, because the whole value in the internet for some people is the anonymity. The fact that they are not personally held account by the same rules of society that we have face-to-face. In fact, it's one of the reasons why some kids are so comfortable being online, because this is hard. This is risky. This is live in-person judgment. Whereas online, you can say anything, you can be anything, you can do anything, and tomorrow is a fresh new day.
Holman, do you have anything to add, please?
I would agree fully, and I would say from the perspective of offenders and perpetrators who are specifically looking to befriend children and teens, and sometimes even like single parents, for example, you can present in any way you want online. You're not, having that discussion in person. One of the things that we teach at Little Warriors in our Be Brave Bridge program, which is an online psychoeducational component of our program, is that we teach parents or caregivers to really have discussions about things. Issues can't be black and white, or parents can't just control everything, because then specifically teens go out of their way to try to access things that their parents say, no, you can't do this. So the issue is partially that, but partially it's also giving parents the tools to be able to have the very important conversations about safety and about risk and about why they're concerned, so that there can be the discord between them.
Oh, it's okay. Thank you very much to both of you. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you. We will then go to Mr. Diot. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Professor Clark, I know that you had mentioned, I believe, that some children's influencers can make upwards of $30 million. Can you name say, 5 or 6 of the top influencers in Canada?
That's a much harder thing to do. It seems like all the really big money influencers are in the United States or in Europe or in Asia. I honestly, I don't know of any Canadian kids, I should say, who are in that strata of income. But I also would add to that, the $30 million is what they earn from the platforms. It's not what they earn from advertising revenue and other forms of monetization that they do.
That are fairly popular right across the board. Obviously, it's a global village. So can you name like 5 or 6? Because I wouldn't know who they are.
So the biggest YouTuber in the world is a channel called Mr. Beast. And he has transformed the space. He is the first YouTube billionaire. He has product marketing. He now has a Netflix series. The most powerful kid is a kid named Ryan Kaji. He's the one who is the first person to break the $30 million a year level as a child. He started at the age of 6. He is now, I believe he's 15, and he's kind of phased out of kidfluencing, but his parents, who own the channel, obviously, have passed it on to his younger brother and sister, and so they're the ones who are making the money for the family, and they have a company with 50 employees. They have cameramen, they have sound people, they have writers, they have editors, etc. And so it is a massive organization. Those are two of the really big ones that I think are worth noting. But honestly, I have a list in my paper that I'm happy to send you that includes all of the top 1,000 influencers on YouTube, and it's everything from something that's utterly mundane to stuff that is radicalized and very political, and they all have tremendous followings, and they have a tremendous ability to change and affect behaviors.
So, I guess one thing, if parents were watching this committee, they'd probably be fairly alarmed by just how pervasive it is. And I guess the big question they would be asking, like, what can I do? Parents, as you rightly noted, are the best keepers of their children. We don't want governments telling parents what to do with their children, obviously. What would you give for advice to parents to help them deal with this phenomenon?
So the classic thing which was introduced like 20 years ago is just as true today. Make online activities communal. Right? So if you're using your iPad, you have to be in the living room and where we can all see what you're doing. If you're, or the family computer, something. The point being is, limit the ability to do this in your room alone without being able to watch it. That gets progressively harder the older the kids get, right? You have privacy issues. You want the kids to develop their own morals and right and wrong. But at least with my young daughter, we basically say, yeah, you can be online, but we're going to watch what you're doing, and we're going to be there. And we hear something like, I don't like the way that person is talking. Change the channel. Watch something else. Do something else. Because honestly, without that, I don't know what we would do.
Is there anything else? That's a really good point, but is there anything else that's sort of top of mind?
I would also say limit the amount of individual access they have to social media. So, don't let them have a Facebook account. Don't let them have an Instagram account. Or at the very least, don't allow them to post, so that they can follow other people, they can watch other people, but their ability to put themselves out there is limited. Fundamentally, you have to think about online activity as a game of Russian roulette. Okay, the barrel can have millions and millions of slots and one bullet, but the more people do online and the more exposed they are and the more views they get, the number of slots start shrinking to the point where you are almost guaranteed that something bad is going to happen to you when you get into that realm of 100 million views. So, but everything is a risky behavior. Everything you do online is a risky behavior, and it's how risk tolerant you are. And I don't want kids under the age of 14 having to make decisions about risk. They're generally very bad about it.
Thank you. Good points.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. Over to Mr. Natumba for 5 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Chair. Let's come back to the influencers. Given that a while ago, Mr. Shampoo and Mr. Miles talked about it as well. These people have a lot of influence over the youth and the current generation, and even us in some cases. They talk about finance, weight loss, skincare. They talk about lots of things, and in some cases, we listen to them out of habit, and sometimes there's no academic, they use their academic backgrounds to do that. Will it be dangerous? How can we watch or monitor those people who talk to our kids and us? How do we take care of all that?
The problem is there's so many channels available, right? And most influencers are not on just one channel. So you take somebody like a podcaster like Joe Rogan. He has enormous influence in the United States, political influence, social influence. He can create ideas. He can create trends at a whim. But you don't have to listen to his podcast. It's sliced and diced and ends up on YouTube. It ends up on TikTok. It ends on Instagram. It ends up on Facebook. And I don't want to be a free ad for all the platforms out there, but the simple fact is that one voice can have so much reach because it can be amplified in these ways. So to be honest, there is literally nothing we can do to monitor what they're saying or control what they're saying because they have free speech. And when they're adults, they truly do. The best thing we can do is try and figure out how to limit the forms of consumption or at least give control to parents over forms of consumption.
Vous avez raison en disant remettre le contrôle aux parents.
You are right to say that parents must take back control. On social media, there are intelligent ways of creating kids' accounts. There's YouTube for kids. There's also Instagram for kids that is co-managed together with parents. Ultimately, the parents are saying, yes, I'm managing that, but the children are still exposed to the screen. How can we limit screen time if the parents are aware, but it's clearly stated that it's social media for kids? So, and we are in a world where people claim to have rights. It's my right to do X or Y.
Yeah, you're right. It is the YouTube for kids and Instagram for kids it's like watering down wine, right? You're still drinking alcohol, and if you drink enough alcohol, you're still going to get drunk. And I think that the YouTube for kids, yeah, they don't allow advertising. Awesome, excellent, wonderful, but they do allow product placements, and they do allow other forms of sponsorship and spokesmanship, and what they allow content-wise changes based on how old the kid is. So, if you're under 3, all you're getting is a bunch of cartoons or or canned media. Fine, but when you start getting close to like 10 or 11 or 12, you get quote unquote more adult content that has a wider range of influence. So, honestly, I think the only beneficiaries from YouTube Kids are the platforms, right? By creating content for creating platforms specifically aimed at kids, all they're doing is they're turning them into the addicts that Mr. Miles was talking about, right? That you are just creating a behavior that is going to spill over, and it doesn't really protect them that much in the here and now, but it certainly doesn't protect them in the long run because the content is, the median is the message.
Une question pour vous. Selon vous,
Madam Holman, in your opinion, what public policy could help reducing the psychological dangers associated to the excessive consumption of content on social media?
I think that going back to supporting parents and caregivers with the right kind of information is really important. The platforms are constantly changing, and so without having access to understanding how to support their children is very difficult. Many times the children and teens themselves are more savvy on the computer than parents are, and so having the parents have the right resources is incredibly important for them to protect their children. I think the limits and whatnot, as Mr. Clark has spoken about, does need to come from parents, but also as has been mentioned, it's very difficult. You can have a parent who's very good at that in one household, but they go on a play date with another child and suddenly that's open access in another home. And so how do we ensure that all parents have access and that this is ongoing? Very few parents, for example, understand that when their child is playing roadblocks, for example, that they can have access to having friends online with them who may be, 60-year-old adults who are posing as 12-year-olds. So parents need the information and it's constantly changing and it needs to be updated. The second thing that I would say about the influencers is right now, the influencers are motivated in lots of ways, but is there potentially a way to have influencers be motivated to support mental health and wellness and awareness of these things? I think those areas should and can be explored further.
Thank you. Mr. Shampoo for 2.5 minutes.
Merci. Tantôt, je donnais l'exemple de ma...
Thank you. I gave the example of my 14-year-old teenager who gives greater credibility to what he saw on TikTok from an influencer than what he heard from his or her teacher on any topic. This leads me to think on the education model we have in place in Quebec and in Canada today. Professor Clark, let me start with you. Do you think that what is now happening with social media influences on young people, is this not time for us in Quebec and Canada to review how we teach our kids in primary and secondary school? The traditional classroom with a 50, 60-minute class on something, is this not obsolete considering what the young people are consuming on social media?
Well, I will punt the question as to what's the best model of education to my wife, who is an elementary school teacher. But I do think that we think it's a good idea for our kids to learn to question everything, right? And I mean, fundamentally, as an academic, as somebody who teaches in university, yeah, I want them to learn how to question things and ask their own questions. But here's the thing. As you say, if your 14-year-old is discounting what they learn in the classroom and then getting their information from social media because they hear things that they like, and they hear things that confirm their worldview, that confirm their perspectives, that give them permission to act and behave and think the way they want, that's not better. We fundamentally just start chasing the opinions we like and the opinions that matter to us. And that is where influencers actually get their power.
Mais il y a aussi une question de format là-dedans. Le format par lequel on communique...
There's also the issue of the format through which the information is communicated. Is this not a format we could learn from so that the young people could become more interested in the teaching of essential subjects?
I think there's a really interesting point there. And let's face it, to Mr. Miles's point of view, is that there's nothing as addictive as a short video. A 60-second, 1 minute and 20 seconds, 180-second video, which requires very little engagement. But you get very quick hits. The endorphins that Ms. Poulsen-Holman were talking about, if you remember hearing that every time your phone buzzes, you get an endorphin rush, right? Because it means somebody's engaging with, somebody's interested in you. These short videos basically work the same way. They create a rush of endorphins as you get something interesting or fun or cool or exciting, and they never let your brain go. And so, I worry about us using the exact same techniques in the classroom because you get a teacher who's just basically manipulating your endorphin levels. But I do think it is a very effective way to communicate, and it does actually seem to create something that children respond to.
Professeur Clark, c'est sûr que si on réussit à faire ça,
Certainly, if we succeed to do that, we will become millionaires. We will become millionaires. Thank you.
All right. I will be taking the conservative time slot for 5 minutes. I guess my question first goes to Ms. Polson-Holman. My question for you is, you talked a little bit about this in your opening remarks, but I'm hoping you can expand on it actually quite a bit, and that is the internet, often social media platforms and gaming platforms are used to lure and then groom and then eventually exploit young people, and you work with these individuals after these events have transpired, and of course they have a significant effect on them. But I would like if you could to actually just talk about how this works in really simplistic terms, because I think we have members of the Canadian public who are just unaware of the fact that gaming platforms and social media platforms can be used in this way, and the danger that is actually posed to young people.
Thank you for the question. I think that there's numerous ways that this happens online. We know that there's social platforms such as, Instagram, Snapchat, Roadblocks, other games where children, can be playing even in front of their parents in their living room, dining room. Parents can see it happening. They're plugged into headphones and they're having conversations with friends. They don't know that their friend, like I said, is actually who they are. They might have, certain photos of them. They can have conversations. Oftentimes it's not verbally, it's through different texts or instant messaging. And so what happens is that the grooming process from the perspective of the children that we see at Little Warriors happens immediately, is that there's predators out there that are looking for vulnerable kids, and they start gaming, and it all seems very innocuous, but over time what happens is they start learning that they're in maybe a single parent household where there's not a lot of supervision, that a parent is working 2 jobs, or they're alone certain times, and then the child has a picture behind them of their school information, or they're wearing a hoodie or sweatshirt, and so those things can get very easily manipulated. And parents, we have parents who have been very involved in their children's lives and have checked their social media, have, accounts that they can look in at any time, and they wouldn't necessarily see that it's an issue until there's, different stages of the grooming process where they're meeting up, where they're sending images, where they're then manipulating children and teens because they've sent inappropriate inappropriate materials, and sometimes they're actually paying for different access to games, or like coins, for example, that they can improve their standing in certain games, and they can send that through the internet without anybody really knowing anything at all. So this happens online, like I said, much more than parents are aware of. It's frightening to know the extent that this is happening and the ease to which it is happening. And as I've mentioned, unfortunately, it has ended very dramatically and very sadly, where children are being sexually exploited and abused.
So how does it transpire then? How does it, how does it go from sitting in your living room, your parents are aware of your conversations and what's transpiring, to being sexually abused? How does that happen?
Well, sometimes it even happens where the offender is grooming the parent. So it may even be that, they're even talking with the parent online. We've had that happen too. They can manipulate their voices. They can manipulate their messaging. With the child, it happens very insidiously. It's like very small little things, as Mr. Clark talked about, where they start talking about the same likes, that they like hockey and that they like certain games, and they are, watching each other playing the games, and then they'll start asking to send pictures, and it just keeps building and building to a place where suddenly the child has revealed their location, their school information, their age. They've sent photos, and none of that can be taken back. And if a child is feeling that they'll get in trouble from their parents or caregivers, they're not about to share that information even with their friends or siblings or their parents.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. For our final question round, we are going to Ms. Royer.
Thank you very much. I would be remiss if I didn't mention Carol Todd. She's an educator in School District 43, and that's in my riding of Port Moody Coquitlam. Her daughter, at the age of 14, in 2012, committed suicide. Her daughter had been being groomed by a friend, an anonymous friend in the Netherlands at the time. Amanda Todd was her name. And Carol has been a great advocate around tabling legislation. Perhaps my first question is for Dr. Poulsen-Holman. And it's really around, I guess, the fact that our government tried to bring forward legislation around mitigating the risk of exposure to harmful content, and that includes content that victimizes children. And I know that legislation died in January this year, and then Parliament was prorogued. But I'd like to hear from you, Doctor, what within that Online Harms Act, Bill C-63, what in there do you feel should come back in its original form, or what might need to be changed or strengthened?
Thank you for the question. I fully am in support of the Online Harms Act or something similar that's needed to ensure the protection of our children and our teens. I think that there's a few key areas. One is that we need to ensure that whatever we put forward, that there's limited sexual child exploitation that is happening, and there needs to be deterrence. There needs to be areas that anyone who's producing the material, who's using the material, needs to have some kind of deterrence that's associated with those things. Currently, it's very unclear, and it's not consistent across provinces and across judgments. I would say the second is that there's regulation that's needed for schools and for other community activities. It's very difficult for educators to take this on their own. Oftentimes, as I mentioned, the platforms are changing. The information needs to be shared with parents and caregivers as well on an ongoing basis, and it needs to be updated. And then the third piece is that at a community level, there needs to be updates and supports for programs such as, Little Warriors Prevent It program or other organizations who are doing similar programming, so that parents and educators, as well as children and teens, have the right information so that they can continue to have conversation about this. Just limiting things and putting laws on, onto these areas is not enough. We have to continue to have the conversations because things are constantly changing and being updated as well.
I know that for Carol Todd, and given that her daughter would be 15 or would have had her birthday, in 3 days' time, I know that she was very upset that this legislation kind of died. So certainly take your comments into consideration when hopefully bringing it back. I'm going to share my time with Mr. Al-Sood. Merci.
Thank you, Ms. Royer. Dr. Polzen-Holman, when you testified in the Standing Committee on the Status of Women last year, you noted, and I quote, and pray that the number here is wrong, recent reports indicate that over the past 5 years, online sexual luring of Canadian children is up 815%. Is that accurate? And I leave this question open-ended. Could you speak to it a little, please?
It is accurate. I took my stats from specific areas. I can provide more information to this committee as well regarding similar stats as well as that. We certainly are seeing that. I think that the biggest change point that we've certainly recognized is during the pandemic, there were so many things that just completely opened up for children and youth as a result of being online and having access to devices for school. And it, for those reasons, it served a purpose. But since that time, I don't think any of the controls and any of the time spent has been pulled back. Even though children and teens are now in school, they're constantly on devices. I think schools that have taken the stance to not have children on their phones has certainly limited things like cyberbullying as well. And so there's numerous harms that continue to present themselves, and the problem is not going away. As mentioned with AI and other areas, there's just new things that are opening up for us to have to address. And so at some point we need to, have a stand and take a stand on creating some ways to address this, but it's going to be a work in progress because we know that things are constantly changing.
Well, folks, thank you. Thank you to all of the members for being here and for asking such good questions. Thank you to Mr. Clark and to Dr. Polzen-Holman for being here as well. We very much appreciate the information that you have shared with us today, and it will be very helpful in the study that we do, and then, of course, in the report that will be drafted and recommendations that will be made to the government. So thank you. And with that, I will just one very quickly here. Dr. Polzen-Holman, I wanted to follow up with you. You did make a comment earlier and just said that it would be possible to provide the committee with some more statistics. If you could draft just a short brief outlining that, that would be deeply appreciated. Awesome. Thank you so much.